Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. It's me, Austin. Do another solo episode for you guys today. Sorry I haven't been posting as much as I usually do. Life has been pretty busy lately. Between both of my kids having a birthday this month, my wife, and Mother's Day involved, and everything else and work, so have unfortunately not been able to pump out episodes as much as I'd like to. But we're doing our best. So that being said, today we're going to be talking about how much your life is worth, right? And what I mean by that is, in the Minuteman space, the tactical community, the gun guy world, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of money in this industry, right? So there's a lot of diversity of products that are out there, and a lot of different people with different mindsets. So obviously, you can go out and you can get a really top-notch, high-end stuff for your rifles, for outfitting them. Just thinking like flashlights, for example, right? You can go out and pay $600 for a Surefire flashlight, or you can listen to some guy on Amazon. Some guy on Amazon or some guy on YouTube or whatever, and you go buy the $30 knockoff, right? Just kind of an example of like certain things where people will splurge and people will kind of cut back on. And it's interesting, I think, to me, to see why and where people kind of come up with this idea on what is worth spending money on and what isn't. And we see this all the way down from weapon selection to where some people go, hey, look, cheap is good enough, good enough for me. Other people look at it and they're like, hey, you know what? If I'm defending my life with it, I want the best money can buy. So I think that each has their merits in certain situations. And so we're going to kind of discuss a little bit of that today and kind of see, put your money where your mouth is and see how much you think you're really worth when it comes to that. But before we get too far into that, I do got to throw out some sponsorships real quick. So 1791 Gun Leather, they were awesome enough to send me out some holsters to test out. I've been rocking one of their leather inside the waistband holsters for my Glock 19 lately. And they've sent me one of their outside the waistband holsters too. Haven't really had a chance to wear that as much because it's for my 1911 and I just don't carry it as often. But that being said, they make some pretty good stuff. I've never really been one for leather holsters until recently, and I'm really digging them. So there will be a link in the description if you want to check out 1791 Gun Leather for some awesome holsters. Also, don't forget Blackout Coffee. They have been an awesome sponsor for us. They support us. We support them. They support the Second Amendment and believe a lot of the same things we do. So proud to have them as a sponsor on here. Again, check the description for the discount code to get you 20% off your first order whenever you order Blackout Coffee, which is actually pretty decent coffee. So that being said, let's dive into it. So obviously, like previously stated, in this community, this sector of the internet, whatever you want to call this, that we are, for people that are listening to this, whatever you guys consider yourself, there's a lot of different people throwing around product and trying to convince you to separate you from your money, for what better or for worse, right? So we've got a lot of people out there. You've got high-end companies like Hey Strategic or companies like Surefire, like LMT, different companies that make really high-end quality stuff, right? But with that, it comes the high dollar value. And there's a lot of value to be had in their products, but then you also have companies that kind of take what they're doing and replicate it in a way that maybe they're cutting different corners, maybe they have less labor costs, whatever it is, that to the layperson or your average guy, it looks like they're making the same product just for a significantly less amount of money. An example of this, I just watched a video on YouTube recently that kind of inspired this talk a little bit about a guy who was testing out, I think it was Tactical Armament was the name of the channel, and he was testing out a $34 Amazon flashlight and a $600 Surefire. And $34 flashlight was basically an Amazon ripoff of the Surefire. So he goes out, does these testings, beats it up, all this stuff, right? It's not quite as bright as the Surefire. It's made of cheaper materials. It's made of a few lesser things. The mount for the tape switch kind of sucked. But basically what he was saying was, as far as like for actually using it and, the actual need that someone might run into for this, that as far as, in his opinion, putting it on like a non-primary rifle, like maybe your backup gun or secondary rifle or something else you just don't use as much, wound up working out really well for him. To where he thought that was a good use for it, and was pleasantly surprised for the little bit of money that he'd spent on that. Now, I know there's going to be people out there and they'll be like, hey, that's good enough for me. I'm going to slap that on my go-to-war rifle and we're going to call it a day. And I think really it comes down to your mindset and your budget when it comes down to this, on how you look at these things. But I do find it fascinating the way that people will justify certain purchases one way or the other. So, kind of a personal anecdote here, like when it comes to different types of products. As far as firearms themselves go, I'm a big believer in buy once, cry once. I've owned the super cheap stuff. I've owned the super good stuff. I've been everywhere in between. I think that it is important that if the rifle is the primary tool with which you intend to defend your life with in a life and liberty type situation, that it is very important that you have a tool that can get you through a life and liberty situation. So let's start with weapons, and we'll kind of work our way through the accessories, kind of doing a weapon loadout, if you will. So first off, I think it's important to kind of identify the realistic use of a weapon that you intend to get, right? For example, if you want to have a rifle that can get you through life, liberty type of scenarios, something that's like, hey, the Russians are falling from the sky, I got to go out with the guys, and we're going to go do Red Dawn stuff. I think you need to find a rifle that is incredibly reliable and incredibly durable for whatever you're going to do. Now, where people will draw that line as far as what is good to them, that's something I can't do for you. You kind of have to figure that out for yourself. For me, basically the way I look at it is, just because these are the brands that I have doesn't mean there's something that you have to have either. My two main go-to rifles, if it's something that's going to fall, something's going down, is I've got a Colt SP1, that's kind of, I've done some modifying to, as well as a Daniel Defense DD M4 V7. So kind of higher dollar value rifles for the average person across the board. I've sold other rifles to get to those. I worked my way to that. I've got them outfitted the way I want them. I've got the accessories the way I want them. I kind of didn't spare any expense on that. And my thought was, I want to get the best stuff that I think is out there. So when it comes to the rifle platform itself, looking at like things on the cheaper side, same thing like Palmetto, for example. I don't think there's anything wrong with owning a Palmetto. I don't think there's anything wrong with owning a, sub $800 AR. I think that realistically, nowadays especially, with the cost of entry for a company to get into making ARs is fairly low. It's not like you're researching any new technology. A lot of stuff, most of what can be done has been done when it comes to ARs. There's not a whole lot out there that just hasn't been figured out yet. So it's not like a company is going to have to charge a ton of money to, for R&D for this. It's basically plug and play with product, right? So when it comes to ARs, I think that there's nothing wrong necessarily with a $400 AR. I think really what you're getting nowadays from a company like Palmetto is you're just getting less features. You're getting a more plain Jane type of rifle. Look at a company like Palmetto when they started, or even just like, let's go back to like 10 years ago. I remember 10 years ago, you could go on YouTube, go on the forums, go wherever, talk to your buddies. If you wanted to build a rifle, PSA was the way to go, was what people were saying. Now, when you went to the reviews, like on YouTube, for example, you would get things to where you would either have the one guy on one extreme who's like, I got 10,000 rounds through mine, no problem. Or you'd get the other guy who's like, man, I can't get this thing to cycle. I fired, I've tried to run 4 mags through it here, and it's basically a bolt action if it works at all. And in the beginning, Palmetto, I would say, like, their quality control was very spotty, right? And their craftsmanship level was pretty spotty in the beginning. But over time, they put in the effort, they put in the R&D, they put in the manufacturing, invested in their manufacturing process. And nowadays, they're making solid rifles. And really, like nowadays, with the advancements in technology that we've had and how popular the AR-15 is and how easy it is for a company to make one, it's pretty hard to mess one up, right? And so a $400 AR, 10 years ago versus now, I think are completely different, right? 10 years ago, while it was still pretty incredibly common, there just wasn't a whole lot that was going. There wasn't as much stuff that was going on as there is now. Like there's a lot more companies that have sprung up in that last 10 years. A lot more companies doing newer and greater things. And for like a standard M4 style looking AR-15, with just your basic, MOE handguard or your old school clamshell handguard, something like that, and a basic MOE stock with a fixed front sight post, there's not a whole lot of extra features that you're really getting on that. So it can be made fairly cheaply, and generally they tend to be fairly reliable. Now, I think the other thing too is that they work really well for your average shooter. Your average shooter, I would say, is someone who, realistically, if they're looking at like a Palmetto for price reasons, for budget issues of being like, man, I can't necessarily afford a $1,000 or $800 rifle or a $1,200 rifle or even more than that. If you're going to get a $400 rifle, I think that for realistically, that's probably going to last you an incredibly long amount of time for what you are realistically going to do. I think the amount of time it's going to take you to put even 1,000 rounds through that, if you're at the point where you're like, hey, I got to get a $400 rifle, it's going to take you a while to put 1,000 rounds through it. So for the lifespan of that rifle for you is going to be fairly long. Now, if you're somebody who is running and gunning all the time and you put 1,000 rounds in at a range session, maybe not. That rifle, the quality that's going into that rifle may not necessarily be as high for whatever type of purpose for the quality of that rifle may not be as good as you think it is for the purpose that you are intending it for. And so what I mean by that is, you look at like Daniel Defense rifles, for example. They're about $1,700, $1,800 starting out. They may be higher now. It's been a while since I bought mine. Versus, a $400 entry-level rifle. There's a reason there's a $1,400 difference, and it's not necessarily just because of name. So a lot of times, basically what you're looking at is a quality control for one, the materials that are going into the weapon, what grade of aluminum is it, what kind of materials are in there, what kind of accessory products are they putting in there, that kind of thing. Is there any Gucci stuff in it? Is it a cold hammered forged barrel? What kind of steel is it made out of? That type of thing. So there's a lot of difference in that the degradation of everyday use and wear and tear that would be experienced on a certain level for a $400 rifle is going to be a lot different than what's experienced on a $1,400 rifle or a $4,000 rifle. There's going to be a lot of difference there. You look at something like L&T or Knight's Armament. I mean, these things are tanks, right? These things are made to take a beating and keep on running. As far as durability goes, unmatched, right? But I can't dish out the money for one of those. So I've got to cut my corners where I can to save a few dollars to still get something fairly reliable for my purposes. And like I said, I think for your average person, that a $400 rifle, $700 rifle, somewhere in that ballpark, sub $1,000, I think it works totally fine for them for the average lifespan of what they intend to do with that rifle. So if we kind of look past the rifle itself now and we start looking at accessories, let's say whatever your budget is, you've decided you've got your rifle now and it's for what your purposes, it's good enough for you. Well, now that we're looking at certain things like, we're trying to outfit this rifle, are there certain areas you can save money on? Are there certain areas you can maybe spend a little less and get kind of the same idea out of? I think absolutely there are. I think if you look at products, let's start with optics, like a red dots, for example. Companies like HoloSun, SIG, Vortex, a lot of your kind of more entry-level AR optic companies like that. Not ones like, Xing Shang, Industries or something on Amazon where it's somebody's knockoff, but like the same, where we're talking like decent enough product, right? Probably that $100 mark for red dots. Kind of like the SIG MSR, the Romeo 5, whatever the Vortex version of that is, and then like the HoloSun 510 series, I think it is. I can never remember. They've got so many numbers. That in around that ballpark, you're talking about $1 to $150. It's definitely sub $200 optics. You're usually around $1 to $150. They're very similar across the board between a lot of those, and mostly because they're made in very similar factories, and if not the same factory, and kind of rebranded with somebody else's brand on them. So when you look at something like that, I think you can get a lot of value out of some of those entry-level optics. You don't get anything extra. You don't get anything super awesome out of them. But for the average person, that basic red dot, it's going to last you, and it's going to do just fine. Even for somebody who's maybe doing a little bit more aggressive stuff and beating up their rifles a little bit, like I think that stuff's going to do pretty well. I'm pretty hard on my rifles, and I haven't really had any issues with my Holosuns or my SIG optics like that. I was just reading an article the other day about how in Ukraine, Holosuns are widely available and widely popular for the Ukrainians because they're affordable. And so a lot of those guys, whenever they're tasked with kind of getting their own stuff for their weapons and outfitting them, that's the route they'll go. And is there better stuff out there? Absolutely. You got stuff like Aimpoint, right? Aimpoint T2s going north of $1,000 sometimes. You got EOTechs. We're usually around $600-700 or more, depending on the how old it is and what model you're looking at. But kind of starting around that $600-ish mark. For a lot of people, I know that if they buy a $400 or $500 rifle, it's really hard for them to justify spending that $400 or $500 on an optic. And I get it. I understand where you're coming from in that mentality. You're looking at it and you're saying like, hey man, the weapon system itself didn't cost that much. Why would I pay that much for the optic? And again, I think you got to come down to looking at what is realistic for you. Are you going to go out in the woods and, hunt down bad guys and do Red Dawn stuff? Or are you going to be more of like, hey, I got to just stay at home and guard my chickens? Because that's going to be wildly different parameters of whatever your mission in life is going to be as to how durable and how rugged of a product you need, right? To where if you're just going to be, kind of at home and it's more of a home defense thing, you might not necessarily need something that can get, go through an explosion and get dropped out of a helicopter, because you're not going to be doing any of that, right? But if you're more like, hey, me and the boys are going to go out and we're going to go be, SEAL Team 6 boys. All right, maybe you want to invest a little bit more in some higher end quality stuff that's definitely more rated for shooting bad guys and being in combat environments. Look at the combat proven optics, things like that. Maybe you want the higher end dollar rifle. So just kind of keep in mind, like, realistically what you're thinking about, right? And what you think you're going to be using things for. Now, moving from that, like weapons lights. I think that for the biggest things, like when you're looking at a weapons light, is one, like what how bright is it? What is the candela on it? Is it durable? Can it take a beating? Like realistically, if it's on the fore end of your rifle and pretty far out, close to the barrel, right? You're probably going to run it into stuff, probably going to bang it on things, it's going to get beat up, it's going to get busted around. If you're running suppressed, it's going to be exposed to a lot of heat, getting banged around, bumped around on stuff like that, right? So you want something that's durable and reliable in that regard, and something that will hold up to the punishment that you're going to be putting on this. So you definitely want something that's not incredibly cheap. You don't want to get like your $1 Walmart flashlight and just duct tape it to the end of your rifle. I don't think that's going to help you. You're definitely going to want to get something that's decent, but do I think that everyone necessarily needs to go out and spend $600 on a Surefire? Absolutely not. Now, if you're going to be running under nods or something like that, and you want to get like a Vampire so you have the IR capability, now that's a pretty smart move, right? But for your average person, if you're, if we're talking about the realm of $400 rifles and $100 optics, you're probably not running nods. I'd be kind of surprised if that's where you're at. So for your average person, I think Streamlight is an incredibly good value for lights, anywhere between $100 to $150, way cheaper than Surefire for sure. Very similar tape switch, very similar setups. You still have dual fuel stuff out there. You've got some decent stuff for a fairly decent price. And I've run Streamlights on a lot of my gear before. I've run Surefires. I have no problem with Streamlights. I've got a good Surefire on my Daniel Defense. Everything else is basically Streamlight. I've beat the crap out of both of them. Haven't had any issues playing in the rain, playing in the mud, beating them up. No problem. I mean, heck, one of my Streamlights, the glass of the lens is completely shattered. Light still works pretty well. I still run it on one of my backup guns, and it keeps kicking. In the rain, whatever. Like I can't kill the dang thing. So I think that like when it comes to weapon lights, depending on what you're looking for, at least on your rifle, you don't necessarily have to go balls deep into it unless you're going towards, again, a specific mission set or a specific gear loadout. You're like, hey, I'm going to be running nods. I need to have something with an IR capability. I need to have something, like a Vampire or whatever. That makes a little bit more sense in that regard to me, to be able to do something like that. But for your average shooter, you just need some kind of white light so you can see in the dark. I think that that's one of those areas where you don't necessarily have to dump a ton of money into that. You know, you got something like the Rain flashlights, you know, $400 or $500 or more for a light, or you know, like $200 or $300 for just like a head of a light for like mod light. For a lot of people, I mean, that's a big ask, and for a lot of people, it's kind of hard to convince them to be like, hey, I know you only spent like $800 on your rifle. Here's, you know, a $400 flashlight. So I think that it's one of those things where you kind of got to look around and see, like, what is it that you want the product to do? What is it that you realistically see yourself doing with that product? And where would you go for that? So, like, think of it this way. If you were going to go, like, run a marathon, right? There's a specific type of shoes and specific type of clothes you would want to wear for that versus just, you know, doing 40-yard sprints in, you know, on the football field. Like, there's gonna be different things that you're gonna be doing there. Or, you know, being like, hey, I just need to run down to, you know, I need to run to the end of the block and go check the mail versus running a marathon. Like, there's gonna be different levels of things that you're gonna need and different levels of quality that you're gonna want. Because, like, look, if you're just running down the street to go grab something, you can just throw whatever shoes on you want. It doesn't really matter. You know, you're not putting that much effort in. But if you're gonna be running for 24 miles straight, you're probably gonna want some pretty badass shoes and some pretty good clothing to take care, you know, to help you out on that process. Versus, you know, hey, I'm just going to run down the street, or I'm going to go play a quick soccer game with my kids. You know, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about here. Is like, think about, you know, are you going to be like, hey, I'm going to be like, realistically in a, you know, an SHTF scenario, it's going to be like home defense solely, or like, oh, I got to go do something, dispatch something, and come back. You know, something you're like, I'm going to be in and out 15 minutes, like Rick and Morty, right? It's not going to take that long. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of dangerous stuff. Yeah, you might not need all the Gucci gadgets, right? But if you're like, hey man, we're gonna be like, you know, the Homeland Guerrilla Force, maybe you want to get a little more Gucci. So, you know, slings, for example, are another one where I think a really good sling can definitely make or break, make or break a day for you if you have to carry your rifle with you all day long. If you're doing any kind of like rucking or anything where like you have to physically have your rifle on your body, if you have a shit sling, you'll notice it really quick. Now, can you get through life with a terrible sling? Absolutely you can. Is it more comfortable to do it with a better sling? 100%. But there are a ton of companies out there that make very similar products to some of the really nice slings that are out there, and they make them fairly affordable. Now, as far as knockoffs go, I'm not against saving $1. I definitely think, you know, count your pennies and save them where you can. But at the same time, it's also kind of like shitty of a company to basically take someone's idea, completely copy it, and undercut them. So it kind of just depends on where you fall with that, on that way of thinking. You know, where your morality is when it comes to business ethics. I mean, either way, they're both taking your money, and they really don't care about you. You're just a customer. So do with that information as you wish. But, you know, I think that's one of those areas you can skimp a little bit. As far as like other accessories like handguards, things like that, you know, a handguard's a handguard's a handguard as long as they are, as long as they all kind of, you know, they work, as long as they all attach to your rifle properly. So yeah, looking at that, I kind of think that there's an interesting thing out there as far as, you know, how much your life is worth when it comes to this kind of thing, and how much value you put on the products with which you defend your life. And I think kind of getting again into that mentality of like, what are you going to do with it? But there's a lot of people out there, I think, that have kind of diametrically opposed views to this, which I think is really funny. Is I think you've got the guys that are like, hey, I'm going to spend $400 on a rifle. I'm going to buy the cheapest Amazon knockoff parts possible. Not really do, you know, anything in my daily life that would warrant, you know, my claims that these things are battle ready. And then, you know, I'm going to be prepared for the apocalypse, and when things go south, I'm ready with the cheapest gear possible. And then you've got the other guys who are like, I've got the nicest rifle, basically a 1-for-1 of, you know, insert Spec Op Heroes here, that rifle, you know, and the Gucciest of the Gucci, and this thing is basically what the SEALs run, and you're not planning on doing anything. You're like, look, if crap hits the fan, I'm just staying home, right? Which it's kind of like this weird dichotomy where it's like, it always seems like the guys that are going to be like, that think they're going to be doing goon boy stuff in the woods have like the cheapest rifles and kit, when like all the dudes are like, nah, dog, I'm not about that life. I'm just going to chill here and guard my potatoes. they have really nice stuff. And you would think it would be the opposite. But, I think that when we look at things like rifles, right? Kind of going back to that. Recently, I'm going to be doing a YouTube video of this on here pretty soon. But Bear Creek Arsenal was cool enough to send me 3 of their uppers, right? And I'm going to be doing some testing on them because one of the things that's kind of I can't speak English today. One of the things that is interesting to me is that this is a company who can produce an AR-15 for under $400, right? All metal. I mean, they're all metal. They're not like polymer lowers or anything like that. But this is something to where this company is claiming they can have a $370 AR. They've got side charging ARs, and the weird thing to me is like they'll make a standard AR-15 for under $400. And then they've also got like AR-10s and like 30-06, 7mm, like 7mm Remington Magnum, 300 Win Mag. So they, and they're like around 2 or 300, two to I think they're right around $2,000 somewhere around ballpark. $1,800 to $2,000 for the base models. And so they're making a lot of different stuff, right? And the reviews on them are mixed, admittedly. But for me, it's one of these things where it's like, okay, so how can you as a company produce something quality at that lower dollar value, right? And if you can, what kind of quality we're looking at? And this is where I think a lot of people get hung up on this idea of quality and how much your life is worth. So when you look at something like Taurus, for example, as a brand, Taurus gets a lot of crap, right? A lot of people talk crap about Taurus. I talk crap about Taurus. They're not the prettiest guns out there. They're not the greatest guns out there as far as reliability, in my opinion, or as far as like ergonomics or anything like that. I think the trigger's rough on them. But you know what? When I worked at the gun shop, they were one of the number 1 selling guns we sold. And part of that was because they were under $300 and they worked. We didn't get a lot of them back in for repairs. The one in the shop, it would get pretty rough before it would go down. It was surprisingly reliable in that regard. Not as reliable as some of the other guns that it claims to be contemporaries with. And I think there's definitely a level of you get what you pay for in that regard. But for the average person, shooting the average number of rounds per year and the average realistic capability of them being involved in something, it works, And there's a lot of people out there, too, that, like, as far as their budget goes, that's all they can afford. And I'm not going to shit on you for not having a ton of money. Believe me, I'm right there with you. But I think that we need to look at that and kind of say, okay, so, is it, like when we look at something like these uppers that I was sent from Bear Creek, is it cheap because it's crap? Or, like, how are we getting down to this number, right? Like how do we get down to having an upper? These uppers they sent me, I think the most expensive one's like $250, and they're all complete uppers. And I've got pictures of them on my YouTube and my Instagram. But basically, there's a 20-inch M16 style upper, then 2 16-inch uppers, and one of them is side charging, one of them is a standard one. And so I'm really curious to see how well these perform, because to me, it's like, okay, if Palmetto is mass producing, and they've been kind of like the huge mass producer of guns at cheap prices for a long time, and they can't get it under $400. What are you doing that's different, right? And that's where I'm really curious to see it is, as things become more popular, generally the prices of them kind of go down over time, right? It's kind of the flooding of the market to where if you need to be competitive in the AR world, you either have to be super cheap or super innovative. That's really it. You either have to make a really cool product that's super awesome, that stands out from everybody else, or you need to be way cheaper. And then if the dilemma with that is if you become way cheaper, people go, well, why is it cheap? Right? You think about anything else in life. You look at like Harbor Freight tools, right? Harbor Freight tools suck, right? I guarantee you there's somebody on here that's gonna be like, "Oh, my Harbor Freight tools totally fine." Like, I can't tell you how many like wrenches and crap like that I've broken that are Harbor Freight tools trying to fix stuff, right? Gave it one too many uggas, snaps. Some people out there are probably going to have like, oh, I've worked with the same Harbor Freight tool since 1987, no problem. Great, your experience may vary, right? But I think like, there's a bit of a reason why Snap-on is Snap-on. There's a reason why certain things are more expensive and you get what you pay for. But it brings this thing to where it's like there's obviously a market, though, for this cheaper end stuff. Now, part of that is going to be where I think that there's the cheaper end of the market definitely appeals to people who maybe don't intend serious use with their rifle, or like, in theory they do, but in reality they don't. Like the guys who think they're going to be Rambo, but they're not doing nothing. Right? So, but I think it appeals to the people who like, hey, if you want to get an AR just to have one, boom, here you go, man. Like you're not intending to do anything crazy with it. You just want to have an AR to go shoot for every now and then, or even just have one propped up against the wall in case someone breaks into your house. Which I think your average shooter, that's kind of realistically where a lot of people are at, is they're like, they shoot a couple rounds every time they go to the range, not a ton, maybe a box of 100 or something like that, maybe 1,000 in a year if they're lucky. And then they set the rifle, with that Amazon red dot and the Amazon flashlight, behind the door, and that just sits as the home defense rifle. I think for your average person, your average shooter, your average American in that regard, I think that's exactly where that niche of that $300 to $500 AR with your Amazon red dot or your Bushnell TRS-25 dot and, your knockoff flashlight kind of sits, right? Is that you're not intending to do any kind of heavy usage with it. You're not intending for wild things to go down. You're basically saying, look, this is here if I need it. I can take out animals if I need to. I can defend my house if I need to. But I'm not intending on this thing needing to last me forever. I'm not intending on this thing being a, combat rifle and, rushing into these, crazy disasters and, shooting my way through the apocalypse. Now, if your mindset is more geared towards that, I would advise you, like, hey, if you're looking for something that is going to be a potentially get you through very hard times type of thing, you might want something that requires less maintenance, something that's going to require less replacement of parts, something that has a higher, higher longevity. If you're running a product that starts to have issues and failures around 2,000 rounds versus a product that has issues and failures around 20,000 rounds, you're going to want to go with the 20,000 round one, right? Because, like, again, what's your availability on replacement parts? What's your availability on things that you need to keep your rifle running? And then let's just assume you do have replacement parts. Are they of the same quality of the parts that are already in that gun? For example, if the bolt carrier group, if you need a new bolt carrier group for some reason in your, LMT or your Knight's Armament rifle, do you have similar quality components that match the rest of that rifle, or are you just throwing bolt carrier groups in there, whatever, willy-nilly, because you got 10 of them somewhere at a gun shop for dirt cheap, right? That's kind of where we're looking at. So what are you willing to splurge on? What are you willing to kind of, maybe not super break the bank on? And that's going to be different for everybody, right? Again, based on priorities. So for me, it's one of these things where it's like, if it's a life-saving tool, I definitely look at it as something to where I'm not super convinced to go the incredibly cheap route. Now, if these BCA uppers wind up working really well, and I wind up being like super impressed by them, that's one of those things where it's like, again, maybe my mind gets changed. Now, I'm a little biased because, like I said, I've got some higher end stuff as far as, I guess you could call it higher end, with the Daniel Defense, the SB1, kind of like your mid to upper tier entry level, kind of like your entry upper. I don't know. It's expensive for me. Let's just say that. All right. So let's just say you've got your higher, your entry level to higher end, or kind of your higher mid tier stuff. When you've got that, is that going to be good enough for you? I think that, like, if you're planning on doing any kind of running and gunning or any kind of serious gun stuff, that's really where you should start looking at. I think that if your intention is just more maybe the community defense, or not really intending on getting in a bunch of fights, or you just want to have one, I think that your kind of entry level PSA stuff, or some of those cheaper ARs, that's exactly where they excel at. They excel at the person who's just, you're not intending to use it as a battle implement, or at least that's not the intention. And if you absolutely have to, so be it. But when you really start running long-term wear and tear on these guns, and you do it in a very short amount of time, that's where I think you really start to see the quality difference. A lot of these YouTube reviews and stuff, they're like, 1,000 round review. And it's not necessarily 1,000 rounds in the same range day, or even be, 1,000 rounds without cleaning. It's 1,000 rounds over a certain period of time. And part of that, is just 1,000 rounds costs a lot of money, right? Not everybody has a huge budget. Not everybody has an ammo sponsor. Not everybody has the money to buy these parts, right? So, I mean, to buy this ammo all the time, so it might take a while to get to that 1,000 round review. Maybe they clean it every time. Maybe they do stuff to it every, they're working on it, maintaining it, versus, just dumping 1,000 rounds, right? And, getting the weapon heated up and, just consistently running the gun and doing like the old Iraq veteran 88 burn downs, which I think is a great way to see realistically, like, hey, what is the difference between a cheap AR and expensive AR? Go watch this and see how, one of them, 700 rounds in, is catching fire and parts ain't working and everything's done. One of them is, well after 1,000 rounds, just keeps cranking, right? There's a huge quality difference there, especially if you have the idea of running your weapon as any type of support weapon, where you just intend to just dump rounds, popping in a drum mag, poor man's RPK type of deal. You're going to need to be worried about that long-term sustainability and that long-term reliability of that firearm, to where I think that's really kind of where it comes down to. Now, I know a lot of people out there will defend the cheaper stuff as one, like, hey, it's just as good, or like, hey, I've had no problem with mine. And I'm not discrediting that at all or saying that you're wrong. But I think that some people who make the argument of like, oh, well, I can buy 3 AR-15s from Palmetto for what I can buy, 1 BCM for. It's like, yeah, that's true. You could, but, what are you going to do with 3 of them? Do you need 3 of them? Do you have purposes for 3 of them? Versus like, would you rather have 3 okay rifles or 1 really good rifle? Like, I'll tell you a quick little story. The reason I have it in defense is like, when I was working at the gun shop, I always wanted one, right? Money was not, widely available to me at the time. I wasn't making a ton of money working there. And so like that, $1,800 price tag was very far off for me. But working at a gun shop, most gun shops have rewards programs. So with these rewards programs, generally the way that looks is you sell enough guns for a certain company, kind of like getting spiffs or getting freebies or affiliate programs, I guess you could call it. You get free stuff, and sometimes even free guns. And basically, I would get these guns, then either sell them back to the shop or sell them to somebody in person, and then use that money to get defense. So, I had other rifles that were of, I don't want to necessarily say lower quality, but I had like a Smith & Wesson M&P Sport 2. I had a Springfield St. Edge. And, these things, they weren't terrible rifles. They were pretty decent. But I really wanted that Daniel. And so I wound up selling these 2 and getting the Daniel. And the reason for it was, my thought had been before, well, I've got 2 decent rifles. And I was talking to my buddy, and he goes, yeah, but like if the stuff goes down, like you can't walk out with 2 decent rifles. Would you rather have 2 decent rifles or 1 really reliable rifle? Well, that's a fair point, and I know like T-Rex Arms talks about this, about guys where it's like, oh, guys who can't afford NOS, but they have like 27 rifles. And it's true to a point to where it's like, I see a lot of dudes who they're like, oh, well, I built out like 5 Palmetto ARs, no problem with them. And it's like, okay, but do any of them have optics and lights, and are they all built out? And if they are they built out with quality equipment, or did you go with like the cheaper route with the Amazon thing we were talking about earlier, where you've got basically $40 of accessories on it, but you've got a light, optic, and sling, all for under $40, and the Shandong special. Because at that point, it's like, okay, well, are you going for quantity or quality? Like, do you want to have to switch between 4 different rifles if things go down, or would you rather just have 1 really good one? And I think that, realistically speaking, having a really good rifle and a really good setup is more attainable than most people think. It just comes down to how they think about money. I know that for a lot of people, they'll look at it and be like, man, I could never afford, a $2,000 rifle. That's just, $2,000 rifle, an $800 optic, a $600 light. I'm like, oh man, that's $3,400, dude. I'm never gonna have $3,400. But that same guy's got like 6 $400 rifles with, $100 accessories on them. It's like, your money's right there, dude. You're just looking at it though to where you're saying, hey, I'll never have $3,400 at one time, but I have $400 a lot, so I'll just keep buying stuff at $400. So it kind of comes down to a quality versus quantity thing too, when it comes to that. So I think it's interesting, just kind of getting people's different viewpoints on this. And look, don't get me wrong, if you've got something that's inexpensive and it works, hell yeah. I know, like, when it comes to gear, I'm that way, right? Like, my thing on that is gear. Like, I love Milsurp gear. And for me, I'm like, look, it's not super expensive. It's affordable. I didn't have to pay $600 for a plate carrier. It works, and I'm happy with it, right? And I've tested it to my capability, and I'm there. With rifles, I'm just a little biased when it comes to this. I'm a little more buy once, cry once when it comes to the guns. With gear, I'm a little less so. So for me, that's just kind of the way I look at it. So again, kind of going back to these, I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm rambling here, guys. To me, it does anyway. But, you're all aboard with this, so let's, choo-choo, away we go. Going back to this BCA thing with the Bear Creek Arsenal, I think for me it's going to be interesting to kind of test these and put them to the test and see, where we're at with this. Because for me, it's one of these things that kind of working in the gun industry for a while, kind of little insider tip for you guys. When you look at something like a Palmetto or something like a BCA or whatever other companies are out there making these, fairly cheap ARs, one of the things I think is like really, if you use Palmetto as the standard and you start going cheaper than that, it makes you start to wonder, like, where are you doing things different? Or what, are you cutting corners to make that cost? Is it that maybe you have less QC, and so you don't have as much, you're not paying people to do quality control? Or maybe you're less worried about your cosmetic process. Maybe you save money on the anodizing. You just give it a less than up to par, or less than desirable anodizing process or something like that. And maybe that's where you're saving your money. But it's one of these things where it's like, look, generally if it's too good to be true, it generally is. Right? So where is it that we are cutting corners? Or where is it that we are making sacrifices in certain types of quality or materials to do this? Because really the only way a company can really make these prices much lower than they already are is either to cut overhead by generally paying your employees less or using a cheaper manufacturing process, or to cut corners in your manufacturing process to make it to where there are certain things that would normally cost money that you don't have to do. And so that's where I'm kind of curious to see about this. Now, I don't know. I have mixed hope based on these reviews that I've seen a lot of other people do on some of these things, where when it comes to the uppers I was sent specifically, it's like I either see reviews where people are like, this is the best thing I've ever seen, I can't believe this thing's only $200, this is wild. And on the other side, I see things that are like, this thing's a ticking time bomb. So I'm interested to see how this goes. And Bear Creek, if you're listening, I'm going to do my best and see how. I really hope your stuff holds up, because I think it would be awesome if I could be like, hey man, this thing is, you can get a rifle for under $400 and it works. I think that would be the American dream, man. If just because I like some higher end stuff doesn't mean I necessarily want to have to pay for it all the time. And if I could tell everybody, look someone in the face honestly and be like, look man, you could go out, get a $400 rifle, get a $100 optic on it, get yourself a sling and a white light, and you are set and ready to roll. And I can tell you can trust your life to this $400 piece of equipment. I would love to do that. I would love to do that and quit this whole shitting on everybody who's poor game, right? And I would love to be able to be like, look, man, I know for a fact that I can trust my life to this. I've shot X amount of rounds through it, no problems, right? So I really hope that these things turn out to be good, because I think that would be freaking awesome, to be able to do something like that. And I think if we could drive down prices of other ARs by making these cheaper places more competitive in that regard, as long as they're putting out quality stuff, I think that would be awesome. Because I do think there is definitely a ton of stuff in the industry, and I'm sure some of you guys would agree with me, that is overpriced for no other reason than whoever's name is on it. There's some things like prime example, look at Geisley right now with their 6mm arc mags. $115 frickin' dollars for a magazine, dude. That's insane, right? For no other reason than Geisley's name's on it and they know you're a fanboy and you're going to buy it. And if you buy one of these magazines for $115, I will unashamedly tell you to your face, you're a retard, right? That is that's asinine to me. I mean, dude, there are rare World War II firearms that not in production that you can find magazines for less. This is insane to me. That's $115. That magazine had better be made out of pure gold, right? Like, that thing had better know the secrets to the universe, because that is an insane amount of money for a magazine like that. So, like, just using that as an example of things that are just way too overpriced because they've got a good name behind them, right? And they can try to justify it any way they want, but it's bullshit. So that's just my little personal rant there. But yeah, they can talk about this stuff. They can do this any way they want, but I don't buy it. So I definitely think there's some things in the industry that, you know, are priced a little too high for a reason. Another thing too that drives up certain prices of certain products is that when you have companies with military contracts, by law, they cannot sell to the civilian market cheaper than they sell this product to the military, which means one of two things. When they sell it to the military, they're either going to sell it at a civilian market relatable price, or they're going to jack the price up because it's been accepted by the military. They know the government has deep pockets and will pay stupid money for things and pay way more than they need to for products, right? If the government spent $30,000 on a frickin' toilet seat for the Pentagon, you can be damn sure they're going to overpay for an optics system for a rifle, right? And if that optics system for a rifle is the same optics system that they sell in the civilian world, you're overpaying for it too. So I think that there's a lot of stuff that goes with that. I think also as we see kind of technology develop with optics and we start seeing integration of really cool stuff like HoloSun's kind of night vision red dot integration system that I know we talked about a couple episodes back, you're going to start seeing the prices of certain things go down because other companies are going to have to be competitive and they're going to have to come up with it, with something interesting like that. You know, and you see like in the gun world, when the SIG P365 came out, it would kind of spark this thing in the industry where everyone's like, oh crap, that's popular and it's under $500 and everybody loves it. We got to do something like that. Then boom, Springfield Hellcat. Boom, the Smith & Wesson Shield 2.0. You know, like all these other companies start pumping out product that is basically their version of the same thing and trying to be as affordable, right? Now, other companies, you got companies like Beretta and FN who are just retarded in this regard. And then while these things are coming out, they come out with like the FN 503 and the APX A1 carry, and it's like, dude, come on, you know? So you still have companies that don't get it. But I mean, I think that's going to be the thing is as a lot of the more affordable products increase in quality over time, as the process becomes easier and easier to make these products, I'm hoping that you'll see a bit of a shift to where the expensive stuff won't be as expensive anymore. And the cheaper stuff will be of higher quality. You know, you can look at any product from any time that the longer it's in production and the more technological advancements they are, and the higher the quality, the higher the value you get out of it, and the less it costs. You know, you could look at like cell phones as an example. You know, when the very first cell phones were invented in the 70s, they were comparably, you know, adjusted for inflation, they were fairly expensive. I mean, these were luxury items. You had to be somebody to have one of these. Nowadays, homeless people have a fucking cell phone. Right? Homeless people got iPhones, and you can surf the internet. It's basically a micro supercomputer in your pocket, right? So the value has increased rapidly, as has the availability, and the cost has come way down. So hopefully we see this with some of the cheaper products that are out there. There's always going to be knockoffs. China's always going to make a buck. There's people always that are going to copy something that's awesome and make cheap versions of it, right? So be wary of what you're looking into. Know how much your life is worth to you. Know where you're willing to spend that money and where you're willing to kind of hold back and what is considered a priority to you. You know, again, when we go back to looking at rifles specifically, I think that, you know, the rifle itself should be a higher dollar item. Just me personally. I think that maybe some of the accessories that you put on it, depending on what your purpose is, that's where you can start to look at and be like, where can I kind of save my money? If we're talking about like kit itself, you know, like looking at like plates, for example, you know, you can get a cheap set of level 4 SAPI plates from RMA for, I don't know, like $300. I think that's how much I paid for mine. You know, they're a little bulkier and they're like old school SAPI plates, but they work. You know, I would say as far as compared to other plates that are out there, they might be a little on the heavier side, but they work well, they're affordable, and, you know, that's not a terrible deal to pick those up at. Is there better stuff out there? Absolutely. There are some incredibly light plates that have, level 3 plus or even level 4 ratings. They float, they're super light, and they're $1,000+ Not everybody can swing that, right? So again, it comes down to what is your life worth as far as value, but also how much money do you actually have to afford those things? If you say, yes, my life is worth, the extra money, but you don't have the extra money, then it's kind of a moot point. So with that said, I have been rambling very long time and probably incoherently. So thank you for listening, everybody. You guys have been awesome. Also, check us out over on YouTube. Check us out on Spotify. Obviously, if you're already here listening to that, fantastic. Check us out on Instagram. Don't forget Blackout Coffee. Check out Parcel Safety as well as 1791 gun leather. So we're going to have links to all of those in the descriptions here. And if you want to check those out, anything you do on there, we do have affiliates with them, just to be honest. So you get anything through them, it does help out the show. I greatly appreciate it. You guys have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next one.